So let's join Priya Krishnan of Bright Horizons as she moderates a dynamic discussion with leaders passionate about innovating within the K-12 space in India.
So we have the dubious joy of sort of doing a panel after lunch, but we're very excited to be here. We have an amazing panel here, and we are talking about how we're reimagining K-12. And don't we all continue to reimagine K-12? But I wanted to introduce our panelists here. We have Kiran, Sethi, who's from Riverside Schools, who won the best school in the world award recently. Shaheen, Mistri, who's has incredible acclaim from Teach for India. She's the founder of Teach for India and I've been a fan for a very, very long time. Prajodh, who's the founder of EuroKids and now formerly known as Lighthouse Education, runs Euroschools, EuroKids, and Kangaroo Kids, if I've not missed anything, Prajodh, in your ever-increasing portfolio, and Sandeep, who was part of the founding team at Teach for India and now runs the Circle. And I've been following your work, and many kudos to you for what you've done over the last 2 years, and I hope you continue to scale as you go along, Sandeep. I wanted to, sort of set up the context for the panel, and we had an interesting sort of pre-discussion. And I think one of the themes that we spoke about was the fact that change is faster now than ever, and somehow it'll never again be this slow. So that is, Justin Trudeau, it wasn't my saying, but he spoke about this at Davos, and it was one of the things that resonated with me immensely. As technology advancements take place and what is going on in the world continues to change, we do have a world in which change has become the only constant. But as humans, I think we're accustomed to a great deal of consistency on a day-to-day basis, especially when it serves us well here and now. And as a parent, what helped me succeed is something that I want to see help my children succeed. So the here and now is always comfortable. The challenge today is, and I think over the past couple of decades, is the pace of change is accelerating at that exponential rate. And as we're dealing with more and more, how do you keep up with that change? And added to that is the fact that we're all in the state of perma-crisis. It is hot. The world has gone through crisis after crisis in the last 4 years. I think the turn of this decade has been one crisis after the other. I think the jury is out on whether that's served us well or it's served as an impediment. But today with me, I have 4 incredible panelists, so I am not going to be the one who's doing the talking. I'm hoping to set this up so that we can get different perspectives. But I thought we could start with, Kiran, perhaps you, to talk about what has changed from parent expectations. Over the last 20 years, and I said this when I started, saying that as a parent, when I had the kids, I said, I want for you to be a busker and be a musician on the street. And then as my son's headed into college, I'm like, okay, the things that serve me well is exactly what I want for you. So what has changed from a parent expectation standpoint? And what have you seen evolve?
What has changed? Not very much and then very much. So I think a lot of parents still look at school as a place to pass time and test and hopefully get a job. So that's one strata of parenting that for some strange reason for the last 25 years of running the school, I haven't seen change. But I think what happened with COVID was quite something interesting. So much of the parenting became outsourced. So for a lot of parents, they outsource parenting. They outsource it to apps, Khan Academy being the favorite. They outsource it to after-school activities, tuition classes. And for some strange reason, the focus of schooling being foundational, value-based, basis of how you grow, has got less value now. So wherever I can, I would use it as one part of the whole big space because there's so much choice. So COVID just gave so much choice. Everybody could sit at home and reach out to a child at home. So suddenly for parents, it became like this massive menu of possibilities. So for those, they choose to now take that over the the sort of faith in a schooling system. So I think for what I've seen is you're still serving all of these aspirations, these fears, these emotions, these desires of parents. That hasn't changed. Parents are still the most emotional human beings on the planet. You know, they'll all start off saying they must be a musician, and then they all want them to be in IIT, you know, for some strange reason. So I think for me, it's just this choice has opened up. And choice has meant a lot more parents are choosing, you know, from this menu of possibilities that they didn't have before.
Got it. And I think that is unique to the industry, is that we have two consumers. It is, you know, the child and the parent. The child is the true consumer of the service and the parents paying for it. So Prajodh, you know, as someone who's set up these numerous number of schools, and I know you're setting up different formats across the country, what have you seen change from a parent perspective?
So Priya, you're right in saying that we serve two masters. You know, there's the customer, the parent who pays for the service of the consumer, which is a young child. So in that sense, all of us at least serve two masters here. Actually, there is general consensus in my view around in India about the transformative power of education. I think that there is general consensus across socioeconomic classes, right? And which is the reason why you see potentially the 100% gross enrollment ratio in schools. We did a very good job at getting kids to school. I think that across. But when it comes to the private pay market, which is with our kind of schools, which is more masstige, premium, super premium, I would just classify that way. I guess what's changed in India is that I think parents want better, but they don't know what better looks like. And I think there's this constant quest of saying, I want better than what I experienced. I guess that's what's really happening, and that quest for better is leading them to different kinds of schools or formats of schools. Formats which are experiential, project-based, there are all those kinds, including the international curriculum schools, which are standing up and say, you know what, this is how better looks like. We are international curriculum. But there is also this set of parents who said, you know what, we've done well for ourselves. Why should we change as well? Why are you asking us to change? So I guess they are in that current conundrum, if you ask me, about this whole thing about change. And this, I guess, 35 to 45-year-olds are going through that more than anything else, which actually takes upon, I guess, school operators to come up and say, this is what good is, this is what good looks like, and come subscribe to my services. So I guess that's the opportunity part as well. But I would think that this is the change that at least we've seen in this for the last about 20 years now. And things are in this state of flux.
Got it. No, and it's interesting that you say that, you know, we serve two masters. I do want to talk about the third one, which is teachers. But I wanted to talk about this little incident that we had called COVID, which, you know, I think served both as an inflection point, but also as a derailer. We saw learning outcomes struggle. We saw children's attention spans go down. But we also saw, you know, people adopt technology in a way that had been unprecedented. We saw helicopter parenting. We also saw empathy for teachers, you know, because suddenly parents realized, like, oh my God, this is what a teacher goes through. So Shaheen, I'd love to hear from you in terms of what you saw as COVID. Was it headwind or tailwind, opportunity or crisis?
Yeah, so I'll speak from the vantage point of low-income children in urban India that we work with. I think the big worry was the lack of preparedness to deal with the effect on education of the pandemic, because everyone, understandably so, was so swept into the unprecedented health crisis. And so we had children coming back to school, for example, in grade 4, where they'd been out of school for 2 years, which essentially meant all their learning was forgotten. And a month after they entered the government schools, there were exams at a grade 4 level. So I think the lack of thought, planning, capacity to think in parallel of what was going to happen to our children and how over time were we and are we going to make consistent effort to get kids back on track? Because I think the 2 years of school closure sent them way off track. I mean, academically, socio-emotionally, in multiple ways. And I think we're still sort of reeling when we look at our results and how our kids are learning with that. Directionally, I think many of us are in the right direction, but the gaps are very vast. So I think that's the truth or the reality that we saw. I think the hope was, I do think it fired up in us as educators a lot of imagination. Like, I remember someone telling me, like, isn't it crazy that if you can't enter 4 walls of a classroom, essentially learning stops? And that's crazy, right? So I think what COVID allowed us to do was say, wait a minute, who teaches, where we teach, when we teach, all of this can be reinvented. And as you said, there were beautiful examples, I think, of suddenly grandmothers at home being involved in virtual class and yoga happening in the mornings. And so we were able to see more holistic education, in some ways more exposure than we had before. And we were able to see that the single teacher who you happen to get, whether good, bad, or average, suddenly now that wasn't your only hope, because anyone could teach you and they could teach you from anywhere. So I think that was the hope.
Yeah, and that's incredible. The fact that you were able to bring an ecosystem around the child and get them engaged. But Sandeep, you're also trying to influence this at scale. And what did COVID? You started up the firm, I think, towards the end of COVID, and what was the hope there? Did you see it as a headwind or a tailwind? And, what have you seen with the schools and the entrepreneurs you're working with now?
Yeah, so I think just to build off of that a little bit, if we rewind and actually try to say what was the pandemic like for kids in India, you have the largest school closure in the world, right? Closed for the longest period of time in the world. And because of that, as Shaheen was mentioning, you also have kids essentially just stopped learning, right? For the vast majority of Indian children that don't have access to connectivity, that don't have access to a home infrastructure, that don't have access to a tech-savvy teacher, learning just came to a screeching halt. And it stayed that way for the better part of 24 months, And, very much building off of that, like you saw that play out in classrooms and in schools across the country, but you also see reports come out that said, actually, wait a minute, like, we don't even know if kids could ever catch up because of this, right? And so there was one report that came out that actually said, this will cut out 7% of a child's future life income, right? Just because of basically the loss of learning that happened. If you don't have access to connectivity or a tech-savvy teacher, then you're actually losing a significant portion of your life income. And think about that for, the vast majority of Indian children. And so I think that for me, the worry, I think, is that that'll just never be caught up. The worry is that will impact future lives. The worry is that that's going to have a moral, a social, and an economic argument that we will all face for years and decades to come. I think the hope is several. I think, I loved the parents want better but don't know what better looks like. And I do think COVID accelerated that a little bit, right? I think there was this hunger for, wait a minute, could we actually get school to be something different? And given that parents were spending time with kids in ways that they just weren't before, you had parents actually saying, like, this isn't what my child should be doing. And that was actually true across income levels, And I think the second is you started to really see what's possible with technology. Right? Like, I still to this day do not think that technology is a replacement for what the physical can bring, but I think you started to get a vision for, wait a minute, if we can blend this together, and if we can bring these two worlds together, maybe we can take a step that we wouldn't have been able to take before. And I think, as you mentioned, many of our entrepreneurs, the circle, are trying to lean into that. They're trying to say, actually, can we feed into the desire for better? But to that, can we figure out what it means to reimagine this thing we call school?
Got it. And I want to pick up on the technology and innovation in a subsequent question. But I'll come back to Kiran, you, and to Shaheen. I know how much both of you are focused on the teacher teacher quality and leadership within the schools. And I think we all come from a worldview that if you get the classroom environment right and the teacher in the classroom right, magic can happen. And I loved what you said, Shaheen, which is how do you get the family involved in that process, and learning does not necessarily have to happen in the classroom. And this has been a very difficult time, like even at Bright Horizons, this was the time during the pandemic where teachers said, I am done, I am tired, I'm exhausted. They were leaving the industry, and if we all believe in the demographic dividend that this country has to offer, getting the right set of teachers and committed teachers to come into play is really critical. How have you addressed that? And, again, through the pandemic, how did that play out for you?
I think, like what everybody said, it provided a massive opportunity to upskill. I mean, as the COVID curve was going up, our learning curve was going up equally. And it came from a space of hope and possibility. But that could only happen because the 20 years of building a culture where student empowerment is the focus, where generosity and empathy and possibility are the driving fuel for coming together as a team. That then allowed the COVID moment to be a game changer for so much. So much of the thing that came out of it was because of the previous years, because I met so many of my friends who were running schools where there was deprivation and fatigue and toxicity and the parents were pushing back. So I was just trying to kind of figure out what were the ingredients that were required to build a space where hope and possibility become the reason to come together as a team. And that takes a combination of leadership, sustained, unrelenting, shameless leadership. And leadership that celebrates and enjoys and has joy in the work you do. And I think that piece is what we often forget. So leaders can be bridges and barriers for change. But it comes with really unrelenting stamina. And I think one thing, and I've shared this with Shaheen and Sandeep many times, that talent is just one part of it. It's stamina to stay for the long haul that will really be the game changer. And I think very often we lose that stamina. And I think Riverside showed what was possible. We crafted so much of hope. Like she said, the imagination was crazy. They couldn't come to us. We went to parks. We went to places. We just burst the walls and said, time and space had no limitations. But that could come from a crazy team that believed that this was possible. And I think so I think cultures, and we don't invest much in cultures, and cultures are people, and their hearts, and their hopes, and their dreams, and they all have to reside to go towards a vision. So I think one thing that I would strongly advocate is building the cultures that foster hope and celebration and joy. It doesn't happen by chance. It happens with relentless, persistent, daily actions. And I think therein lies the possibility of it, and therein lies the challenge of it.
And so much of, I think, what we, like you said, the 20 years of building the culture stood you in good stead for reinventing the culture, which is incredible. But you've done this at scale, Shaheen, and, Sandeep, it gives you goosebumps when you think about the largest school population shut down for the longest period of time. So how did you cope with this? And again, how have you continued to attract students into this when there is this dire thing of there is 7%, which is on the of learning loss, but it's also the hope of I could change that over the course of my lifetime?
Yeah. I mean, firstly, I was telling Kiran, I love being on panels with Kiran for many reasons, but when you spoke right now, I was reminded that this is like my soul sister, because everything you've said about people, and I've learned so much. If all of you haven't visited the Riverside School, she said there are too many visitors right now, but it is the most incredible school that I've ever seen. I think very similar to what Kiran said, the belief that people are at the center of changing and reimagining education was very present for me. And so 15 years ago, Teach for India was sort of founded on this idea that we need the people across this country that love children the most, that are going to put them at the center, that are going to fight for them to have equitable opportunities. Could we find those people, India's brightest, most committed people, people that generally wouldn't consider going into teaching and education, to come into education? And I think we collectively just need to do more of that. We need to be really attracting more and more of our brightest, most passionate young people to be teachers in classroom, to be school leaders, to be at all levels of the system up to the level of policy. And I think that's where things are going to change. I remember when I started, it was such a crazy idea that you could get like top graduates in India to teach in a government school full-time for 2 years. And I remember going on to college campuses, this was 2008, and there would be 100 people in the room, and Shweta was with me. She was one of our leading our recruitment efforts at that time. And I would go thinking, oh my gosh, nobody in this room is going to want to do this. And yet, we don't just want some people to do it. We need the best, most committed people leading the work of education. And so I think if we keep that at the center, there's a lot of investments in education today in ideas and products, but there's very little investment in people. And I think ultimately you have a good person there for your own child, like, you know, under a tree, no facilities, but great teacher, versus like IB level facilities with average or below average teacher. Yeah, and swimming pools. I mean, I would put my child under the tree. So that's the belief in people and leadership. Yeah.
Priya, can I make a point here? One observation more than anything else, I guess, during the time of the COVID, though, my observation was that schools actually entered into the drawing rooms of people, right? And what started off with being a black box got exposed, and teachers were exposed the most. And what started with being very judgmental of saying, you know, look how she talks, how she dresses, this is a house. In few months, I actually thought that turned to true admiration. Because he said, oh my God, I don't think we can do this. She really stretches herself, do so much for our children. I thought that during the time of the COVID and post-COVID, the stock of teachers in India and possibly across the globe actually has risen. And that augurs really very well. And I do see that change in the private pay K-12 market as well. So I'm saying the stock of teachers and educators has actually gone up post-COVID.
That is really incredible to hear, because, you know, you do want the best to come into, it is almost, it's a 15-year process from the time the child turns 3 through the time that they turn 18, and you don't know how that end product's going to turn out. So you want the best input to get that output. But you spoke about, Sandeep, the fact that technology has been an enabler. There is a lot that's changed. You know, we've had a data revolution, we've had a mobile revolution. Now the talk is all about AI. I certainly see technology as an enabler to the effectiveness of the teacher who's the center in the classroom. So, you know, is the teacher able to make her records? Are we able to learn from what's going on in the classroom? I think there's a lot of opportunity there, but I'd love, you know, just given the early stages within how you're setting up for other schools and entrepreneurs to succeed, how are you both using technology, and what is the innovation that's taking place, and what's changed in the last 10 to 12 years, and what's accelerated through COVID?
Yeah. So again, I think to go back to context, you know, like, I think the reason that you have people almost craving reimagination, craving something more, craving something better, is because I think there is a realization that this institution that we call school, and we have called school for a long time, and we rushed to democratize over the last 70 years, is in a way going obsolete. It doesn't serve kids for the India that exists today. And India's changed, right? The workforce has changed. Everything around us has dramatically changed. And I say this out of somebody who's gotten into schools quite a bit over the last 16 years that I've been in India. Like, our schools have kind of stayed the same. And I think there's a realization that, well, wait a minute, there's a lot that we need to preserve, but there's also a lot that we need to reimagine, to reinvent, to rethink. And that's coming from every part of society. That's coming from parents. That's coming also from the workforce, right? And the workforce saying, actually, wait a minute, like kids aren't prepared to be able to enter today's workforce. And I think when we zoom out on that, well, we have to accept that, well, technological change is a big part of the world, whether we want it to be or not, right? Technology is a big part of what today's workforce grapples with, and it is here to stay. And I think what that means is that not only do we need to embrace it to be able to raise teacher effectiveness, we also need to embrace it to be able to say, we have a responsibility to equip kids to be savvy. And I think that means that embracing it takes on a whole new life, in my opinion. Now, the unfortunate reality is that simultaneously, a lot of the technological interventions that have been studied are showing mixed results, right, at best, right? And I think that what that tells us is that, well, like, there's a lot of stuff out there that just doesn't work. And we have to acknowledge that, right? We have to acknowledge that there's been a lot that's been tried with tech, and there's also a lot that doesn't work. But I don't think we can say technology doesn't work overall. We should step away from it and step back. I think we have to keep searching because of how ubiquitous it is in today's society. And I think, honestly, I think we just need examples of institutions that are able to blend that are able to bring that to life. And so I was actually visiting a school a few years ago in the United States, in Missouri, and this is a school called Kairos, right? And when you go into this school, like, the entire school is actually designed off of a WeWork office space, right? And so you go into the school and you actually see kids hanging out in conference rooms, you see kids hanging out in like these cubicles, right? And so I was very confused when I walked in. I was like, am I even at the right place? And you walk around, you see 300-400 kids, and they're actually coming from really socioeconomically diverse parts of town. And I finally found the founder who I was there to meet, and I was like, explain, please. And he basically said, look, like, we kept getting feedback that kids were dropping out of the workforce, that kids were dropping out of college, that kids, that were from low-income backgrounds weren't making it through and two. And so when we stepped back on that, we realized that actually college and the workforce and all of those things that we call life, even if you expand this beyond that, which I think we definitely should, like, don't reflect what's happening in the classroom or in school today. They're like two disconnected worlds. And so he said, we decided to flip this on the head and say, could we actually have this environment mirror what they will go to? And so kids are actually using, tablets pretty much all throughout the day. They were remediating, they were working in small groups, and they were basically using teachers as coaches that were there for a regular basis. And I give you that example because I think it's an example of what could happen if we can actually start to figure out how to use technology purposefully and be able to put it into the hands of students, but also be able to put it in the hands of teachers in ways that mirror the society that kids are encountering and are eventually trying to succeed within. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I can certainly say that, as someone who's trying to drive digital transformation in the K-12 space, the notion of saying how can it be an enabler, right? And how can it be a process by which the teacher is effective, the culture is effective. How are you using it, Prajodh? What has been your view as you also start fairly early on in the early childhood years and then are operating K through 12 as well?
So we have a program in our schools which is called Sparks, where we bring different speakers of different vocation and profession to come and speak to our students to spark their interest. And hopefully interest gets into passion and purpose later, right? That's the whole idea with Sparks. And the one which was the most popular, the one that we did about 6 or 8 months back, was bringing an influencer, a social media influencer to talk to kids. Now you've got investment bankers, you've got all kinds of people talking to them, but the one which was the massive hit was the one which was by a social media influencer who said, I'll teach you, give you tips to be a social media influencer. I do agree with what Sandeep said. I think the fact that classrooms should mirror the reality of what's happening outside, I think that is the need of the hour. And one big turn around that is about the digital citizenship, digital literacy, and digital skills that we so want, and we speak about it. I don't think we do anything about it. And which is the reason why I guess K-12 schools should now take that upon themselves to be able to do so. In my own view, I think devices will enter the classroom much more earlier than what we would have thought across variety of grades. And in my own view, from 3rd grade onwards all the way up to 12th grade. Now, whether it's BYOD, whether it's, devices provided by the school, all of that apart, I think there is a use case for that coming in very soon. And K-12 as a sector which has been fairly insulated by automation, digitization, and all things AI, I think very soon will need to embrace this because there is definitely a use case for saying, can we free up teacher, educator time so that she can focus on what's most important, which is helping children learn? And if there is automation, digitization, and all things AI, which can help that cause, why not? And maybe that's the future, and probably it's coming much earlier than we thought it would. Recently someone talked to me about a school in Burhanpur in India. I had to look where Burhanpur was, and he said that's a fully technologically enabled school where children actually have devices from grade 5 onwards, fully enabled, and both teachers and students are using those. So I think it's coming. We'll need to, I think our teachers more than anything else needs to figure out a way to learn these digital skills. I think it's coming, and it's coming much faster than you would think.
Yeah, I think it is, we have a digitally native consumer base, which is children learn this quicker, parents are now digital natives, teachers are digital natives. I'm not, the notion of saying, how do you teach it responsibly, as against saying, how do we get teachers to shift to adopt it, might be a thought. But given we're sort of running out of time, I'm going to give each one of you a minute. Given we're supposed to be reimagining K-12, I am a big believer in the fact that India sits on the largest demographic dividend in the world. We have 160 million children under the age of 5. If we get this right, we have the way to put India on a map in a way that most other countries would dream of. You as leading educators, are on that path. And as you're thinking about the future, what would you want from economic reforms? What would you want to think about what are your predictions? What should people in this room be excited about, saying, here is the reason why you should be in K-12, and here's how we can responsibly move this direction forward. So I'll start with you, Kiran, and then we can probably do a quick round robin.
I think one of the things that I have been a little concerned with, that in 2023, we're still talking about reimagining education. So for me, that's really where the heart is. I mean, that's the problem. If you're sitting here and apparently everybody seems to have reimagined their part of education, there is no collective will. It takes collective will to want to do this for every child, not my buyer, not my customer. It is the right of every child. So I think one of the things that I have seen is that collaborative will, and I think for me that sometimes can be lost in my version versus your version of change. And I think I'm curious to know what would it look like, especially for a place like India. I keep thinking, my God, every child on the planet tells you in the first 2 years, look at me, I can, and then we send them to school and say, now keep quiet. And we do that for the next 15 years. And then we find it, as if it's a surprise. Oh my God, you can't change the world? I mean, why not? So it is that bothers me, that still in 2024, sorry, not 2023, 2024 already, 2 months are gone, that we're still talking about reimagining it. So I would say it's, bahut ho gaya reimagining, abhi thoda karna hai.
I think two things come to mind. One is that feel important. One is proximity and partnership. I think one thing that I feel really strongly about, every time I come into an education conference, I'm looking for children, and I don't see them, right? Until we're listening to, learning from, truly keeping our children at the center and following their lead, I don't think we're going to solve this problem. A paradigm shift from saying we are here to serve our children to we are here with our children. So that's the first idea. And the second is also coincidentally starts with P, is I really think, like, to what you said also, Priya, to me, it's not about putting India on the map. It's about remembering that education has the power to build a kinder, more peaceful, more equitable world. And if that becomes the goal of the education system, everything we do is going to change and shift. Livelihood is one part of the picture, but it's not the whole thing. And so to me, that's the power. Like, kids should come to school thinking they're developing the values and mindsets and will and skills to actually build a better, kinder world for all people.
I'll probably talk about the NEP there and said, I think the NEP 2020 is a visionary policy document. One needs to execute on it. For all the K-12 entrepreneurs and the ecosystem here, I actually think that to think scale, maybe to do justice to the opportunity in India, because if you have to make Viksit Bharat 2047 possible, I think this is the right ingredient. But for that, you'll have to think scale. We think scale, 175,000 students, hopefully we'll get to 1 million. But that's really what my urge would be, to think scale when you want to serve the cause of India.
Yeah, resonates so much with so much of what's been shared, but I think I would say that we need to be wary of silver bullets. And I think that the size of India is massive, right, as we all know. And as a result, I mean, we can't be in India and not be thinking about how do you reach as many kids as you possibly can. It is almost a moral imperative. But I think in pursuit of doing that, what we often resort to is, what's the next silver bullet that'll fix education in one shot? What's the next, computer in a box, or like this next tool that'll come out and just fix all of education in one shot? And I think what time and history tell us is that, well, silver bullets just don't exist. And so how do we be wary of silver bullets? And I actually think the best way to be wary of silver bullets is just to remember that impact on each individual child just matters. And when we hold that as sacred, then we start to be able to blur economic lines. We start to say, how do I get this to kids who need it the most? We start to really be able to think just fundamentally differently about what solutions will work. Yeah.
There's so much food for thought, and this is, we could keep talking here, and we had 35 minutes, and I was trying to wrap up what was immense wisdom in this, on this panel. I've certainly learned a lot. I do think children, if we invest in children, they bring a kinder, gentler world. People are important, culture is important, collaboration is critical. There is hope when when you see what is possible in the classroom and you could do it at scale. I hope you gathered as much from the panel as I did. Thank you for being a patient audience, and we really appreciate you being here.